aproximar, eu fico. Estamos numa sala very big.
Okay, so maybe I just start introducing the seminar. I will just spend some few words introducing the seminar, the series, and after I give the floor to Roberto, we introduce our today guest, who I really would like to thank for joining us today and for presenting her work, Anabelle. But I let the introduction of your work to Roberto in few seconds. So this is the Seminar on Social Movements and Political Action. It was created in October 2014, so it has more than 10 years. And we have monthly seminars, and most of the seminars are online, so or hybrid as today's session. So you can also follow the video of our sessions here on our website. The next event is in June, on the 5th of June, and it will be on non-radicalization of Muslims in Southern Europe, migration and integration in Italy, Greece, and Spain. It will be the presentation of this book, which was published and authored by different authors, among which Tina Magazzini, who will be in presence presenting the book at CICS.NOVA in June. And we will restart the cycle in next, I think, September, October. We don't have for now session planned for July. Well, you can have a look at our website and to understand better the type of session, type of events we organized in these years. And you can also watch the video of past events, just going on the page of the event and clicking on the. Well, this doesn't work. Yes, it works. So we have the YouTube. They all are collected on our YouTube channel. So if you don't have anything to do, sometime on Sundays you can watch our event. And for now, I stop here and I give the floor to Roberto to introduce our today's session. And thank you very much for joining us today. And I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Guia. Okay, this is a session which has been organized jointly between the seminar series on social movements and the RIGOP, which is one of the research groups at ICS, and also in partnership with an EU project called InsightDem, which is a project focusing on democratic innovations in Europe. That said, let me introduce Anabelle Félix. She holds a master's degree in Latin American Studies at Sorbonne Nouvelle University and a PhD in Political Science at the University of Montreal. She's now a postdoctoral researcher with experience in the field of public security issues and community-oriented policy programs in Latin America. She is interested in community engagement, social inclusion, and social justice to bridge the divide between academic research and the real-world challenges facing public security. She has conducted ethnographic research on the factors that determine the implementation of such programs, and she has published in high-indexed journals and books, and she also lectures for undergraduate and graduate courses. She has coordinated multi-stakeholder projects, and she is also a member of international and interdisciplinary networks. That said,
thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank
you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Can you just confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's just do this, just to make it easier for you.
Yeah, also for you, otherwise you can see.
And I just wanted to
Yes,
yeah, easier.
Okay. Well, so hi everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. Because we're a small group today, I would like it to be more interactive. So if you have any question during the presentation, please don't hesitate to stop me and ask the question. I think it could be nicer to make it more interactive. So today I'm going to present you a research that I've been doing during my PhD, which is done, but I've been reflecting about it, and especially because of the name of the seminar about innovation and social movements, but it's not really toward the social movement part, but more the innovation. So today we're going to talk about community-oriented policing in Brazil and Mexico, and I'm asking if it's really an innovation or more of the same. Okay. One way of framing problems of violence, of chronic violence in the world generally is to say that it's an issue connected to public security, and who is taking care of the public security issues are the police or law enforcement agencies more generally. But what we see is that in a lot of democratic regimes, if not all, the police is often highly criticized. You've certainly heard about George Floyd in the US, but also here in Portugal, Odair Muniz more recently. So those are people who have been deadly attacked by the police. Well, the question of the police being democratic is whole. So in this context, there are some programs that are presented as more preventive, as more democratic, such as community-oriented policing. We are going to delve into the details of the definition right after, but it's sometimes considered as a form of democratic policing. And today I'm going to talk about examples of those kind of programs in Brazil and Mexico. So obviously there's no a universal definition of what is community-oriented policing that I'm going to call COP for now, because otherwise it's pretty long. But this definition is often used, and it says that COP is a full-service personalized policing where the same officer patrols and works in the same area on a permanent basis, from a decentralized place, working in a proactive partnership with citizens to identify and solve problems. So here, what we have to keep in mind is that it's included into a preventive approach of public security, which means that the idea is to prevent violent or delinquent acts to happen in opposite of repressive approach, which are more traditional and conventional, and which are basically police officers reacting to an act, a violent act or delinquent act when it happens. This is just to kind of simplify it. So to give you a little bit of context, when these kind of programs were implemented in Latin America, we have to understand what was the situation in relation to violence, but also in relation to the police-society relationships. So first of all, when it was implemented, when it started to be implemented in Latin America around the 80s, 90s, at the beginning more as an experiment than a policy, we were in a context of recent authoritarian past. For instance, in Brazil, the military regime falls in 85, and Mexico, the PRI, which was a political party that was reigning in Mexico for over 70 years, leave the floor for another party only in 2000. So just to have an idea that authoritarian past is actually really recent at that point. Also, we have in the 80s, the arrival of cocaine in narco trafficking. And with that, it's really important because with that, there's a increasing wave of violence coming in narco trafficking in general. I'm going to show you some data after that, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about violence. In general, what we see is that the response of the government, local or national, is a repressive one, which means that to respond to violence, they respond with more violence, just nourishing a cycle of violence. And with that, we also have to keep in mind the kind of social representations that people have, and local government and police officers generally have about marginalized population, which is people normally violent, people more prone to delinquency, etc., etc. So a few numbers here that you can see on the top left. What we can see is that in absolute number of homicides in Latin America, we see that in 2000, for instance, we had around 125,000 homicides, when it increased to almost 160,000 in 2016. Also, what we see on the bottom left is that while Latin American population represents 8% of the population of the world, it represents 33% of homicides in the world. So you can see that it's really disproportionate. And also, you can see on the right that on average you have 7 homicides per 100,000 people in the world in 2012, when it's 21.5 in Latin America, so the triple. So this gives you an idea of what we talk about when we talk about violence in Latin America in the early 2000s and the end of the 90s. So for my thesis, I focused on 2 examples of community-oriented policing programs. The first one are the UPPs. I'm not sure if you heard about it, but it was pretty popular at the beginning. So UPPs is pacifying police units that were implemented in 2008 in Rio de Janeiro. So they are not a new corps of the police, but they are a unit of the military police of the state of Rio de Janeiro. They're a form of community-oriented policing and units that only operate in the favelas. So they are not implemented everywhere else in the city. The main goals are to take back the territory from drug traffickers, to reduce violence and crime rates in the favelas, but also to build close ties, relationships, and trust relationship with the population. In practice, this happens in 3 phases. The first one is called tactical intervention. So this is not done by these units, it's done by the BOP. I don't know if you heard about the BOP, but it's basically it's a special unit, and when they send this special unit, it's not to do community-oriented policing, it's to kind of clean up somewhere. And when, in that case, the idea was to warn the neighborhoods 1 week before they arrive so that drug traffickers can go away before they arrive. And if they decided to stay, so it means that they wanted to enter in a conflict or confront them. And so a lot of people were dead during those interventions. The second phase is the stabilization. So the BOP stays for a few days, for a few weeks, until it's all stable, according to them, meaning that they will consider that there's no more threats of narco trafficker coming back to take back the territory, or that there's no threat of another criminal group going to try to take back the territory, etc. And then, only then, when they consider that it's stable, they will call the UPP to come. So what you can see in the picture is actually the police officers dedicated to the UPP Mangueira Tuiuti, you can see here. So what's different from them and the BOP, for instance, it's first of all the uniform. The uniform here is blue. The BOP is all black, and and I won't enter into detail, but it's pretty violent, the way they present themselves. Here, it's really different. You can see also a container, which is the base. So it's supposed to be an administrative base for the police, but also a space where citizens, neighbors can come and complain if there's anything happening with police officers of that unit. My second case was in Mexico, a program called Policía Vecinal o Cuadrantes. And it was implemented in the city of Mexico in 2003, and Nezahualcóyotl as well. Nezahualcóyotl is a city of Mexico, but it's part of the suburb of Mexico. It's pretty similar to the UPPs because it's also a form of community policing. This time it's implemented on the municipal scale, so not on some specific neighborhoods, but everywhere. And they have this idea of neighborhood policy. The goals are pretty similar as well, reducing the rates of violence and crime, reducing the perception of insecurity, but also building relationships of proximity and trust with the population. In practice, what they do is to take the map of the city, divide it into areas, each area into sectors, and then each sectors into cuadrantes. Quadrantes are a block. It's like a block of streets, maybe 5 to 6 streets. And then you have one duo of police officers per quadrante 24/7. This means that you have always police officers on the ground on each of these quadrantes, on each of these sectors, etc. And finally, they work through as well what they call redes vecinales, which are if I translate, neighbor networks, which materialize into WhatsApp groups, basically. And you can have neighbors of that quadrante and police officers dedicated to that quadrante. So it's supposed to work as an information sharing group. For instance, neighbors are going to see a car that they don't know in the streets, and they can send a message and say, you know, there's this car there for a few days. We don't know that car. Is there something, you know, happening? Can you check? And the police officers can check the plates and stuff like that. So it's really, the idea is to create a space to share information and to create public security together. All of this is theoretical, obviously. So, what I've seen, well, not only in my readings, but also then on the field, is that the evaluation of those programs do not reflect their actual implementation on the ground. Obviously, there's two things to keep in mind. First is that the evaluation we can have access to on internet, for instance, are a lot of times produced by the government implementing those programs. So there's a performative logic here. When you are a government implementing a program, you want it to be successful. So the evaluation you're going to produce are a bit biased. And even if you try to have scholars or academics to specialists to do it for you, if there's a financial compensation or something in return, there are some bias. Also, another thing that I've noticed is the scale of evaluation. A lot of times they tend to evaluate the program at the city scale. So they're just trying to aggregate everything and then give you an evaluation, an average evaluation, which is logical and which has also a few positive points. But what happens is that it hides also a lot of complexities and a lot of differences between neighborhoods. And secondly, another thing that I've seen is that between comparable programs in the region, there are such different evaluation of them. So I was just trying to understand why such comparable programs in so similar contexts are so different in the implementation and the results they're getting. So my main argument was that we need to observe the implementation process and not only the results to understand those programs, and to understand also the degree of respect for human rights, and the application of the principle of the rule of law by police officers. So my question today, I kind of adapted it for the seminar. It's not my doctoral question, but it's close enough. So is community policing an innovative solution to the problems of police violence and a lack of respect for human rights? To answer that, so I've done an ethnographic approach in Brazil and Mexico. So I spent 9 months in the fields between 2017 and 2018. It was conducted in 2 phases. The first phase was to first create a trust relationship on the ground to safely enter the ground, not only for me, but also for the participants of the research. And then, only then, I started my observation, non-participant observation with police officers when it was possible, but as you can imagine, it was not possible in every case. And from the side of the population as well. I also conducted a lot of semi-structured interviews with police officers, decision makers, community leaders, residents, and a lot of people, and did 3 focus groups. So coming back to the question, so to answer that question, I found that it's important to see what's happening from the police side, but also from the population side. What my idea was that a public policy or program, when it's implemented, it's not only implemented by agents of the states, it's also received by people on the ground. And the reception, the process of reception is going to interact with the public policy, with the program. So I have 2 part of results. So the first one is from the side of the police. So I'm going to show you what I found on the ground that impacts directly the way the COP program is implemented on the ground from the police institution side. So here I'm going to read to you an extract of an interview with that commander, which was commander of the UPP coordination in the beginning of the UPP programs for a few years. So he said, the group I identified with, not in terms of professional categories of soldiers and officers, but in terms of group of thoughts, ideologies with which I had affinities, this group, was not politically, it was not in a commanded position. There was only an opportunity when the UPP appeared. So here, what we can see, it's a lot of tensions inside the institution. What we can understand here is that the police is not a homogeneous whole. It's rather complex. And what the comparison between the cases allowed me to do is to detect a few factors that actually have effect on how the program is going to be implemented on the ground. The first one is political and police leadership. Here, the idea is to say that the partisan orientation of the local government is going to determine, I don't like that word, but is going to highly influence the type of police leadership we're going to have. And the kind of police leadership is going to respond to a logic of progressist versus more conservative police officers inside the institution. So here we can have the example of Nezahualcóyotl, where they had local government in 2003 of the left. So it was a left party governing the city at that point. And they nominated a more progressist director of the police. So the profile of this director is really interesting. It speaks a lot to that kind of partisan logics. He's someone who has a PhD in sociology, which is rather not expected for a director of police. He's someone that created a left-wing political party when he was younger, even if today it's not working anymore. but it is somebody that's always been engaged into the left through his career. And so now he's director of the police in Mensal since 2003. So this is interesting to see the kind of logic that we can have, political logic we can have into the police institution. The second factor is ethos and socialization process. So ethos being conception and forms of rationalization of the world, which produce frames of reference for the police officers on the ground, on their work. And here, the idea is that the ethos inside the police is more or less compatible with a community policing program. Rio de Janeiro is a great example where when we think about the creation of the military police of the states of Rio de Janeiro, we have to go back to the Cold War. So the police was created, this police specifically was created during the Cold War with the idea of an external enemy to fight. They had to fight against an external enemy. And then the focus changed to a war on drugs. So then the enemy became internal. So, but always with the idea of fighting as being the principle, the main objective of that police. So when you have this kind of ethos, this obviously come through the formation, the training the police officers have, but also the socialization they have inside the institution. And when you present community-oriented programs, they don't think this is police work. For them, it's more social work. So it's a sub-police. It's kind of a punishment to go there. It's not seen as something really, manly and really police work. And finally, the last factor is control mechanisms for police work. This seems rather obvious, but it's really different from a police institution to another. The way they're going to control what police officers do on the ground is really different. It's really complicated because they're on the ground. There are a lot of police officers. They can't be behind them a lot of time. But it's going to influence the degree of flexibility they have to redefine, the police officers have to redefine the program on the ground. So it's really important. And here we have the case of Mensal again, which is a great example where there are many mechanisms and police officers can't know when it's coming, where it comes from, and who is going to control them. So for them, it's a pretty high risk to not follow the program as intended by the director. So now, from the other side, as I was telling you, there's also the side of the reception of the program by the population, which is going to impact the way it's implemented. So here again, an extract of an interview with Alice, which is the founder of an association in the favela Cantagal Pavãozinho, where I was working. And she's saying, what's important is that I can't like the UPP. You know why? We know that one day it's going to end. And when it ends, narco-trafficking will continue here, and they're going to make us pay one after the other. So here, what we can read is that she's not saying she doesn't want to like the UPP. She says she can't. This is really different. She's speaking about feelings of fear. She's speaking about social control, which is not appearing anywhere else in the program. So it brings up the question of local social dynamics and construction of state-society relationship in territories dominated by non-state actors. So here again, the comparison allowed me to see three factors that are really important. The first one that we can already see in the extract actually is the kind of cohabitation with criminal groups they have in those neighborhoods. So the kind of social control they're going to exercise will define the more or less important obstacle they have to engage with relationship with the police. And in this case, the case of Nessa is really interesting because the cartel that is dominating that territory tolerates a relationship between the society and the police as long as they don't interfere with their business. It's like you can do your stuff, your program, speak together and everything, but just don't speak about us, don't interfere in our business, and we're gonna be okay. So this is interesting, but this opened the door to this kind of program. The second one is embeddedness in local mobilization network. Here, the idea is that local association organization, they have a power of engaging with residents and local stakeholders. And if the police is able to talk with them and have a trust relationship, it's more likely that this network is going to share the word and open the door to the program as well. And finally, the last factor is local police representation. So it may seem obvious at the beginning. You're going to tell me, yeah, but the representation is obviously negative. People don't like the police, and especially in those neighborhoods, because they have a large history of violent relationship with the police. So it's obvious that it's really a negative representation that they have. The question is not if it's negative or positive, it's more about, does it change over time? And here, what I found is that it can change. It's really counterintuitive in some cases. For instance, in Rio de Janeiro, one of the favela I was working on, they have a history of manifestation against the police violence, a lot of demonstration of police abuse and disrespect of human rights, and et cetera, that we could think that they won't be open to try to change those kind of representations. But what happened is that the first commander sent to the UPP of that favela kind of changed their perception of the police. Because this commander, a majority of people I was interviewing, they all remember his name 10 years after. They all remember his name, they remember what he did, and they remember that time as a kind of the most peaceful moments of their neighborhood. And what I saw is a police officer, really believing in that program and trying to change the thing. And also not allowing, but recognizing and acknowledging that the police can be bad, and that is trying to go away from that bad part of the police. He was trying to do the opposite. So he really tried to build trust relationship with the population, and it worked at some points. But the only thing is that he stayed maybe 3 or 4 years, and then another commander came and he was different. But what happened at that point is that they understood their perception about the police changed a bit, because they came from a representation and all the police officers are bad to a representation of some of them can be good and some of them can actually try to make a good work and make things better for us. And this kind of opening at some point in the time can allow this kind of program to be more to be more positively received by the population. Well, so all of that to say that the implementation of police program is a spatial and temporal construction between police officers inserted in logic specific to the local police institution, but also between inhabitants who received the program and were also inserted in local social dynamics. So is community policing a real solution to the problems of police violence and the lack of respect for human rights? It depends. It depends a lot. It depends on the context of the local police institution, but also of the proper neighborhoods. So thank you. And
thank you very much.
It depends. It's the best answer.
I know. I know.
Thank you very much, Annabelle, for this.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see Guia, but we have some people in the room. So
I cannot see. So maybe, Roberto, since you're there, you can see both people in the room and people on Zoom. You can, if you want, you can manage the question and answer time.
questions, comments, doubts? Yeah. Okay, we have one question here, and then I go to Diego. Okay. Maria.
Thank you so much. Really interesting.
Can you hear Guia?
Can you hear me?
Maybe, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Try to talk.
She's talking, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was curious about, because you did fieldwork in 2017, 2018, and I don't know if everyone was aware, but there was in 2019 and 2020 really serious violence and conflictual issues on the street in Rio. So how do you perceive that after your time in the field? Were you able to interview any police officers, and what were their perceptions? Because as you said, you know, at least I know more about the Brazilian case. I honestly know more about Mexican healthcare than Mexican policing. I'm so sorry to tell you. But at least in the Brazilian military case, it's actually really strange how you have military police officers and it's internal. They're not fighting an external community, which is very different, for example, for the US case where they have civil officers that are trained for a very different scenario. So what were their perceptions and what was actually done? I kind of observed that in your presentation, you just focused on the Brazilian case. And how would you compare that to the Polícia Nacional in the Mexican case?
The examples you're saying,
yeah,
the
you're
quotations,
like,
yeah.
it just, maybe I'm wrong, but as you presented it, it seemed like you were focusing more on the Brazilian case, which is wonderful, but I'm curious as how you would make that comparison with the Mexican case.
Okay. We take more. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So about the fieldwork in 2018, 2017, 2018, and the violence that came right after. Obviously, there's a political component about that. And also, it depends. I don't know. Were you in Rio at that point?
Was.
Yeah.
There was like, I was there for a short time. I was on vacation.
Yeah.
So I was there, and you could see on every corner like federal military police with like these huge guns. And so it was a big, we had come at a time where just the presence of these people, of military police, you see people are a bit more apprehensive to do anything wrong, but it is a scary scenario. And, you know, for someone who's not accustomed to Latin America, because this is very normal for police officers to walk around with these huge guns, but my American colleagues were very shocked.
Yeah, well, because also during that time there was it was like a political mess, really. And what happened, it was they called like a state of crisis of violence in Rio de Janeiro, and that's why they called in the army to take the public security issue on their hands. The only thing is how I read that, it was more political strategy more than anything else. I'm not sure we can talk about increasing violence at that point. It was just showing more manpower at that point, which is different between insecurity and increasing violence, which is different from that. So I'm not sure that I would talk about increasing violence at that point. I think it was just more showcasing, you know, gun power more than anything else, and this was part of more a broader political strategy at that point. And well, I won't talk about the political, otherwise we can spend a lot of time here. But it was during that Temer phase, and then Bolsonaro came. So yeah, at that point, there was a lot of focus on public security being out of control and everything, but nothing happened really. Like when I was talking to my friends in those in the favelas I was working on, they were just like, yeah, they're here doing their show, but nothing is happening, you know. So yeah, for me, it was more showcasing gunpowder than anything else. About police officers, yes, I did a lot of interviews with police officers. Actually, this is my my third field work in Rio and Mexico. I already did field work in 2014, so just right before the World Cup. So this was another context, a lot of opening to observe the patrols and everything, because they wanted international eyes to look at that and to say that it was working, and it was very good. But so in 2017 and 18, it was obviously a bit different, but I had access to a lot of police officers, a lot of them that were working in the UPPs before. I did not have access to observation at that point because they didn't let me to. And also the UPP were really different at that point. But their perception is that it could have been something really different, the UPPs. I'm talking about police officers more progressists. A lot of them were saying that UPPs were really like a window of opportunity to change things on the police side, and the structural problem that police have, acknowledging that there are abuse and a lack of respect of human rights. This is something really systemic inside the police. But they also said that this was also really political, a lot of political gain for a few people. And then when they didn't need it anymore, it stopped. So the perception was that it could have been very great, but that it was too linked to political gains. So yeah, basically that was their perception. So, and then the focus on Brazil, well, it was not my intent to focus on Brazil. And actually I was trying to put more examples of Mexico inside. So, but basically what you've seen here, the results are the results of the comparison of the two. The excerpt I put here as extract of interviews are just a few examples, but it could have been from Mexico as well. But the factors that I have showed you are really based on the comparison of the two countries. Actually, it was 4 cases because I was doing 2 neighborhoods in each city. So yeah, just to say that maybe it's because the interviews the extract of interviews you've seen were coming from Brazil. It may appear as focusing on Brazil, but it was actually no. It was really based on the 4 cases. Thank you.
Roberto, maybe we collect some questions together, 2 or 3. What do you think?
Yeah. I think Diego wanted, right? Do you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's a very fascinating aspect of police reform. But in your presentation, for me, it was not very clear how you framed the goal of those community policing initiatives, because at the beginning, you were presenting the high rate of homicides in Latin America. So the problem seemed to be presented from the standpoint of security. We know that demand of security is something very important in Latin America. And now the success, just call it success, of Bukele's very harsh way of providing security. So there is a demand of security, and it seems it's becoming very, very popular. But then when you talk about the implementation of the community policing initiatives, it's not about providing security to the population, but of having a police that doesn't violate human rights, which are 2 different issues. So I think that in your presentation, the other side, to what extent was there a success or not in providing security against the perceived criminality in the neighborhoods? So maybe drug dealers are criminals in one way of understanding things, but maybe they are not posing a threat to the neighbors that are living in that neighborhood, or maybe they are. But you didn't talk about that side of the community programs, if the local populations were receiving them as a proof that the state was taking care of their security, which is that demand that may legitimize the police.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you for your presentation, Anabelle, and I want to apologize for being late, but
No problem.
it was a mess with the
I
traffic
know.
because of a strike in public transportation and all of that. So my question is more of a curiosity. I'm not familiar with these type of topics in research at all. My research is more related to politics and communication, but there is one thing I think I could find maybe in common, a bridge between my experience as a researcher and yours, which is, I assume, trouble and difficulty getting access to the research subject. You mentioned that you did interviews with police officials, and you also did non-participant observation. And sometimes it wasn't possible to do at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that much like what happens in Portugal, there was probably some resistance on behalf of the institution to give you access to the scenarios you needed to collect your data, right? And this is relevant for this field of research, I guess, because at least in institutions like the police, there's this sort of stereotype about researchers in the social sciences, that we're all leftists, and all of that, and that we're trying to scrutinize their work so that we can say bad things about the police. And also concerning the neighborhood, because people who are from more marginalized neighborhoods are also very suspicious towards outsiders, right? Mm-hmm. So I was interested in getting to know how was your experience in getting access to your research subjects, and what were the strategies that you used as a researcher to overcome those obstacles?
Thank you.
Any other questions or?
I have a very quick question. Thank you very much for your presentation, Anabelle. I really enjoyed. And sorry if my question, maybe you clarify that, but maybe it was I didn't really understand well. To which extent there is a participatory dimension? This is more a Roberto question. Sorry, maybe you also wanted to enter this field. A participatory dimension of the communities to discuss the programs of implementation of this policy.
The policy design, you mean? Okay. Maybe I can.
No, if I can just add, because I had one question, but Guya spoiled my question, because my question was, if you could provide a very short definition of leadership, because you say community-led, right? So, but I don't really understand what kind of leadership does the community have in this?
The community, like on the side of the police or the side of the population?
On the side of the population.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Very good questions. Well, I'm gonna go in order. Who was the first one? I know it was online. It was online. At the beginning, when I presented the metrics and everything, was just to give a context of the violence in Latin America. It was not so much to say that, and actually the goal of community-oriented policing is not so much decreasing violence. Of course, it's part of it, but the main focus is to build trust relationship between the police and the society. So I would say that the metrics of violence are interesting to give us a context, and also they are debatable because obviously they give us a really narrowed view on violence. But the thing is, my main argument in the thesis is to say that it doesn't really matter the results in terms of metrics of violence. What we have to check and what we have to look at is how this kind of program is implemented. Because when we talk about COP, community-oriented policing, this means 24/7 cohabitation between police and the population, which is a lot of time of cohabitation, considering that we have an history of disrespect of human rights in those neighborhoods by the police officers to those people. So for me, the question was more about, if we are talking about a program that is supposedly more democratic, how does it implement, how does police officers implement it in a way that is going to respect human rights when they have never respected human rights in those spaces? So my focus was not, is it a success, but rather, how do they implement that? And what's the experience of such programs by population historically violented by police officers who are now going to cohabit with them 24/7? So because we're talking about a program that is supposedly innovative, democratic, breaking a little with the idea of repressive police and everything, sure, but how do you make sure that police officers won't repeat the kind of practice that they had until now in those neighborhoods? So yeah, just to answer the question of metrics versus focus on human rights. And if I may, what was local population taking care of security? How did the local population perceive the program? So it depends on the cases, but a lot of them were, maybe to take a bit of the two cases of Mexico and Brazil. One of the cases in Rio, a lot of people were saying that they associated the fact that when the commando I was talking about was there, they were not seeing narco traffickers with arms. They were not seeing narco traffickers dealing drugs on the streets. For them, they associated that lack of visibility of the business as more security. So it kind of provided more security in some part of the neighborhoods. And in Mexico, the same thing. The fact that they could see the police officers patrolling every day in a lot of streets, they associated that with more security. So at some point, when you talk with the population, they perceive those programs as increasing their security. Then we can talk about what is security, of course, because is security metrics about violence? Is security the feeling of safety we feel? Is security the lack of robberies? I mean, you know, we can debate about that, but the point is, I don't like to say that, but in the successful cases, which are really depending on the time frame of that on that experiment, it relates more about what they feel and what they perceive as insecurity, which is different from I perceive as insecurity. Of course, for them it can be not seeing people armed in their neighborhood. It can be not seeing people dealing drugs in the neighborhoods with kids on the side, you know. So yeah, I would say that it depends a lot. But if we talk about perception of the inhabitants, it had at some points and in some spaces impacts on that. About the question on the fieldwork, access of fieldwork, this is a big question. We could discuss that for a few hours. But first, I have to state the obvious. I'm a woman, I'm white, doing fieldwork in Latin America in neighborhoods that are generally more In the case of Brazil, more from African descendants, and in Mexico, more from indigenous people. So obviously, I was not really, I was different. So this was good and bad in some aspect of the access to the fieldwork. Good because being a woman, people think that I'm not a threat, So what I'm gonna hear, what I'm gonna talk about is not really. I'm not a threat, I'm not understanding what's happening, so that's fine. So at some point, I was not playing dumb, but I was just like playing along, like, okay, okay, so sure, I'm not gonna understand, that's fine. I was understanding what was happening, but it was kind of it was helping me a lot to be a woman in a lot of spaces. Resistance, yes, of course. I had a lot of, especially from the side of the police, depending on the cases. For instance, in Nezahualcóyotl, Mexico, I had full access to the police because that director, the progressist one, was like full on. He was just like, yeah, do your job, it's gonna be great. So I had full access to that, and it was great. And the police officers were just happy to have someone being interested in their work, because also that's something, because it's a lot of the police against the society. And when you have someone interested in their work, in their actual day-to-day work, asking questions about how they feel and how, they're just like, what's happening, So this was great, but in the other case of Mexico City, it was a bit more tricky because they didn't want me to be there with them because it was in a specific neighborhoods where there were happenings, a lot of informal agreements between the police and narco traffickers and the local governments. And so they didn't like me to be there. So they used a lot of strategies saying, yes, because they will never say no to you, but they would send me to patrols going in like middle-class neighborhoods or rich neighborhoods. Yeah, but this is not the neighborhood I was looking to, So this game was just going on for a few weeks, and at some point I just understood that it wouldn't happen. So I did it. Otherwise, I did it on the population, and I had interviews with police officers. But that part of the observation I couldn't do. But just the fact that they played that game for so long was telling me so much. It was that I, perceived. So this was really interesting. And then about the cliche of social scientists being leftist and everything, as I said, in the case of Nezahualcóyotl, it was actually not bad because we were on the same stance, On the case of Rio, that was more complicated, but actually the thing is they didn't even ask me anything about my research, or they just, at that point it was just like, no, it's not going to happen, and that's it. So. And from the side of the population, I think it depends on the way you present yourself, the strategy you're going to implement, and the fact that you are aware about the logics going on in the neighborhood. If you're coming and being a bit you and doing your stuff when there are narco traffickers kind of watching you and watching what you're doing, obviously it's not going to work. But if you show that you understand what's going on and that you respect the social control they exercise and everything. And also, I don't like the idea of going into the field, collect the data and leaving, So my idea was to do voluntary work or stuff like that in local associations to give back immediately. And this helped a lot as well because we built trust relationships from the very beginning, and I did tasks that they wanted me to do, even if it had nothing to do with my research. But I felt that it was a kind of a way of balancing a bit of the dynamics of power that we had. So yeah, but we could talk about that for hours. And actually, I'm publishing an article, a chapter about being a woman on men's spaces. in the field, and I think there are many things that I'm not talking about now, but I could talk about after. About the participatory dimension of COP, well, so I would say that the only case where there are kind of participatory dimension of the program is Nezahualcóyotl, because the idea is of the director is to give, I mean, in his words, is to give back the power to the citizens. So he organizes a lot of meetings with the population. There are a lot of, when you look at the patrols that they do, it's not only patrols. What they do as well is to ask the police officers dedicated to one quadrante to come maybe once a month or once every 2 months to go and organize a meeting with the quadrantes to make the neighbors talk about security issues, what they want about security, how do they feel, and what they would like to have in that kind of program. So I would say that this is kind of the more the closer form of participatory public security policy here that we have. In the other cases, in Rio de Janeiro, there's no participatory dimension at all. And in Mexico, well, not at all. But in Nezahualcóyotl, you have that idea of organizing regular meetings with the neighbors to have feedback from them, but also have ideas, suggestions of what could be improved. Obviously, it's not all roses and everything, but there are a limit of what they are going to, what the police officers are going to say to the commander, and then what the commander is going to say to the director. So there is kind of a filter through the process, but it's kind of a form of participatory public security program in comparison to others. And the leadership question. Leadership, it was, the question is more, what is a leader, the community leader? So here, community leader is more about the engagement, immobilizing power they have over the community. For instance, in the case of Brazil, there are a lot of neighborhood associations, and they actually work as kind of local governments. They will receive, for instance, letters for neighbors. They will receive, really, like, they centralize a lot of services that normally local government would do, but they don't really, those neighborhoods really don't have access to those services. So these kind of association do that work. So you have those associations, but also you have more like cultural or sport associations. So when I talk about community leader, it's not about leader of the whole neighborhood, but people that have access to networks of the neighborhoods. So yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that here Diego had another short question, or
Yeah, we have another question here as well.
Okay.
So maybe.
Yeah, let's.
Okay, so Luis and then Diego.
Hey, not so much a question, perhaps comment. First of all, it's a fantastic work that you do on direct observation and spending some time, and also, from what I understand, engaging with the community. When I work with certain type of crime, certain type of deviant behavior, which is nothing to do with drug trafficking, but sometimes it's related to drug trafficking, to do with corruption and money laundering, etc. And international best practice often suggests or recommends that in policy terms that we should adopt that three-pronged strategy for entrenched deviant behavior, such as drug trafficking. That's social embedded, it's systemic, it's complex, touches several issues, as you said, service provision in areas where the state is unable to reach, or even in the most simple forms of like local government it is unable to provide. So you have alternative forms of power. You have economies which are illicit economies but still provide. And two things that in your intervention that I thought you could address a little bit the economic dimension of what you've done. Because you mentioned the Bob comes in and they alert that they will be there a week in advance so that the drug traffickers move out from the territory. But we're talking about the operational guys. But the fact that you disturb the market, it's going to affect the price. If it affects the price, then someone is going to make more money. And you see how the economic consequences of an intervention that it's only single-oriented, it's only a repression, no prevention and no education. And that takes me to the second point, where it seems from the way you portrayed the Brazilian case, at least the education and the repression, they don't communicate, or they don't communicate much. I'm sure there's probably some instances where the police works with the local associations, but they're pretty much doing their own job in a separate way. And that again goes against what international best practice says. You should have a communication between the three dimensions. That brings the third one, which it was missing in your presentation, but I'm sure you interviewed people, which is more a policy dimension. So prevention, it's about infrastructure, it's about mitigating opportunity structures in the community that may be conducive to deviant behavior. And so I wanted to ask you in your fieldwork if you also interviewed the policy dimension. Local government, whoever has obviously a say in terms of what kind of infrastructure can be provided in that in those regions. And again, you started your presentation about the police being democratic or not democratic. I think what we need is obviously democracy before, in terms of how the policy of security is designed and implemented and evaluated. The police in itself, it might have some preventive work attached, but it is a law enforcer. So I don't think, I sit around with the police and let's talk. We can talk strategies of that, as I said, they communicate between repression, education, and prevention. And obviously, you need to have all these people around the table. Yeah, I wanted to know a little bit more about the policy.
Okay.
Got it. Now, Diego has a question as well.
Yes, it was a different question. This type of community police projects have been around since the late 1970s at least. And I was curious in those programs if they were using some kind of model somewhere where things worked well and they wanted to replicate or build up previous experiences. What's the field of good practices that they were relying on? Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe I'm going to start by the last one, which is a bit quicker, about the influences they had. So in the case of Mexico, it's actually kind of a mix of different models that they had. And they still have regular meetings, maybe annual, meetings with different police over the world, including Spain, but also the States, the US, and other countries. But basically, what the director was telling is that he inspired himself on the English model, the Spanish model, and the American models. So he kind of, did a mix of that, and also used his brain with a PhD to kind of adapt it to the NESA context. But they still do a lot of meetings, and they are inserted in networks with different police over the world to talk about preventive approaches and share their experiences, including in Latin America, like in Colombia, for instance, and in Haiti at some point. So yeah, that was basically it. In the case of the UPP, it's claimed as being something really innovative and different and not influenced by anything because it's new, it was how it was presented by the local government at that point. But there are a lot of influences from the States, but also from other Latin American countries like Nicaragua and Colombia. Colombia was really used as an example in both cases. But still, at the beginning, at least, the same thing. They had a lot of networks they were inserted into to share experiences and to share best practices with Europe as well, including France in the case of Brazil. But well, as I said, they presented it as something really new and different from the other models, So yeah, that's it for that question. And about the economic dimension, well, so when the BOP is going into the favelas at the beginning, the idea is not to make peace. This is not the idea. So they want. And actually, when the BOP is coming, is to stop narco trafficking at that point. So the idea is to disturb the market for sure. Yeah. Where it changed, it's when you have the UPP that is that must cohabit 24/7 with the population, including narco traffickers, because it's not because the BOP came that there's no narco trafficking anymore. It's not like that, and sometimes they come back and everything. So the idea is a bit the idea of social peace. If you want to make a contract of social peace, you need some understanding that for the police, the focus, and especially before the mega events, the World Cup and the Olympics, the idea was to make it look great, make it look peaceful. And for that, so maybe they can do their business, but we'll have an agreement. The agreement is just like you do your stuff, but we can't see it. Like we can, you do your stuff, we won't see it, and we want our stuff. And if it's like that, then it was, the peace is happening. So this was kind of a context, really a specific context at that point. It was just during the mega events, and then from after the mega events, it started to be totally different. But I would say that the idea of disturbing the market depends really on the timing and the location of the favela. For instance, if it's a favela which is really far away from the international eye, far away from the touristic zone, from the Maracana Stadium and everything, maybe, I've not studied a case far away, but I've read a lot of things about it, and it's really another experience that they had of UPPs. So we have to keep in mind the idea of the context and the localization of the program. About the policy dimension. Yes, I spoke with a lot of decision makers in both cases. There's obviously what they're going to tell us to make it look good, and there's the reality. But I don't want to generalize and I don't want to make them look bad, but there was always a logic of political gains, obviously. So in the case of Rio, it's really, really obvious that the prefect, the mayor of the city was at the beginning, I mean, he is from the right, more from the right, and he is normally more conservative in public security issues. So it was more toward cleaning up strategies than community policing oriented, community-oriented policing strategy. But the thing is, with the context of international eyes and international pressures, but also the context of the national context of Lula, which was more towards the preventive approach, he calculated that going through a more preventive approach was more of a winning strategy for him politically, and it was, because he was re-elected really basically on that platform, on the UPP platform. So, but when you talk about it with him, it's not going to appear like that. Obviously, it was just like, yeah, he believed in that program, but it was not the case. It was not coming from him, this program. It was coming from other people, from scholars, including. And then he kind of appropriated this program as an electoral platform. In the case of Mexico, well, depends on if it's Mexico City or Nezahualcóyotl. It's a bit different. But in Nezahualcóyotl, for instance, I spoke with all the mayors from 2003 until when I was in the field, and all of them were really. It was part of this. It was part of their program. It was they wanted to change the way police officers were treating people. They wanted to stop corruption because Nezahualcóyotl is strategically located. When you see in comparison to, you have Mexico City and Neza is here, and the airport of Mexico City is here. So it's on the route between the city and the airport, which is routes really strategic for narco trafficking, obviously. So Neza was, for a lot of years, one of the most violent and most corrupt municipalities. And when the left gained power in Nezahualcóyotl in 2003 for the first time, they wanted to stop that image of Nezahualcóyotl. They wanted to, change really deeply the political culture of Nezahualcóyotl. And so I spoke with all those mayors, and all were really believing into, buying into that community-oriented policing program, and wanted to keep it alive until what they could, So which is really different from the Rio scenario. It was not really an electoral strategy. It was more like they believed into that, and it was something that they wanted to create. They did nominate that director of police is still here today. And yeah, so that's really different. In the case of Mexico, well, interviews were really interesting and funny because they tend to say half of the words they want to say, so you have to understand and interpret more or less what they're saying. They're not talking about someone, but then they give you, that mayor, I can't give you the name, but the mayor that were there between that year and that year. So, it's pretty easy to understand. But in Mexico, basically, it's just one, fighting against the other, saying that this one wanted to put something really different, to implement a different thing. The other one was corrupt, so blah, blah, blah. So it was just, political games. So it was really interesting to see the differences between the cases. But for sure, one of my chapter in the thesis is about how the political context created an environment that is more or less fruitful for this kind of program. And you can see that it's really different from a country to another. So, and yeah, of course, law enforcement are law enforcers. So they are directly connected to the political leadership. But this is one of my arguments in this. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow. Thank you very much. I think that if we don't, I don't know if there are some more comments.
There's no, at least, I mean, no, I don't see any.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Okay, so maybe we can close here. Thank you very much, Annabelle, for joining us. It was very nice to have you, well, to have you there. I'm sorry if I'm not there with you. And also it was very nice, Roberto, to have one more session of our joining initiative between the two seminar series. I don't know if you want to say something,
See you next year.
See you next. Well, I think I will come back from Madrid before, but we will continue organizing events together for sure.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Anabelle. Thank
And
you
for
very
the
much.
questions.
Really,
It was very
really,
nice.
it was very interesting.
Thank you.
thank you, everybody. Also,
Enjoy the Friday, enjoy the weekend.
and have a nice weekend. Yes. Bye bye.
Bye, ciao, Buia.
Thank you.